from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.
At the Legislature today, emotional debate in both houses as the Senate takes up the Coal Jobs and Mine Safety Act of 2015. In the House, delegates focused on the legal remedies those hurt or killed in a mining accident will have. And we'll talk with Agriculture Commissioner Walt Helmick about his plans to grow the state's economy on the Legislature today. Good evening, I'm Ashton Mara. Senators voted on and approved 7 pieces of legislation today, many of which were governor's bills. The upper chamber unanimously approved legislation to transfer the Children's Health Insurance Program to the Department of Health and Human Resources and eliminate several boards and commissions that are no longer active. For the second day in a row, senators put off amending a bill to repeal the state's prevailing wage, but voted on another piece of legislation getting industry attention, the Coal Jobs and Safety Act. Senate Bill 357 changes safety and environmental standards related to the coal industry that supporters say are necessary to keep the state competitive. Competition from cheaper natural gas, federal regulations, and the increased cost of mining more difficult to get to coal seams are all reasons the industry and lawmakers who support the legislation say the changes are necessary. Environmentalists, however, say the bill reduces water quality protections, while union leaders say it weakens safety standards and puts miners at risk. Senator Bob Beach took issue with one safety standard in particular. The bill removes a requirement that miners come out of the mine when certain types of equipment are being moved. That movement, Beach says, can cause a spark like the one that started a fire in the Blacksville mine in 1972, killing 9 men. So Beach proposed an amendment that would keep that safety standard in place.
This piece of legislation that we're trying to protect here keeps things intact and gives a sense of comfort to both miners and their families when they're underground. You know, we don't need to be in a position where we're rolling back safety. I don't care if we're talking about transportation safety, mine safety, water safety, whatever it may be. We as a legislative body should not be rolling back those accomplishments and successes we've had in the past.
Beach says the change is personal for him because one of those 9 men killed more than 40 years ago in Blacksville was his uncle, a 23-year-old foreman who left behind a wife and young daughter. But Senate Judiciary Chair Charles Trump says the type of equipment Beach is concerned about are used in very few mines in the state, as few as 6, one senator remarked. The new legislation, Trump says, would put West Virginia in line with federal mine safety guidelines.
If the gentleman's amendment is adopted, as I understand the amendment, it would require the same procedures to be used in all areas of all mines whenever equipment is moved, whether or not they're energized trolley wires.
Beach's amendment failed with one Democratic senator, Art Kirkendall of Logan County, crossing party lines to join the GOP in opposition. As senators moved toward a final vote, Senate Minority Leader Jeff Kessler remarked, however little the number, there are still mines in the state that needed the additional protection Senator Beach proposed. That concern, among many others, he says, were reasons he would vote against the bill.
But you know, when we failed to pass this amendment today, to protect those miners, and it may only be in 6 mines, it sends a signal to the people of this state that we are reducing the safety standards in this state. Now, folks will say, well, we're in line with what they do with MSHA and every other state. Well, why not, ladies and gentlemen, should not the state of West Virginia, when it comes to miner safety, have the most stringent safety standards in the nation? Why should we not have standards that exceed the federal standards for the protection of our miners? That's the part of the bill, Mr. President, that causes me trouble and causes me great concern in passing this bill. Because I'm sure it's going to pass. I know that. But I think we're sending a message loud and clear that the safety of our miners isn't worth or as important as the profits that are created.
Other Democratic members said union leaders, inspectors, and other stakeholders were not included in negotiations that led to the bill. Senator Daniel Hall says that's not true. Those stakeholders were included and support the changes.
We want to protect our coal miners. And I feel like I know that very well. A few years ago, UBB happened in my district. Senator from Raleigh, Senator from Boone and Logan, right down there with us. I've never spoke about this before, never made it a public issue. My dad was underground that day, or went underground that evening after the explosion. He's state mine inspector. He's first inspector on the scene. I lost my neighbor. I lost family and friends that day. I sat up all night with family, grieving in just complete shock of what had happened. Now, I'm not talking about this to make it theatrical for the TV. I just want you to know that nobody knows more about this stuff than the people from Southern West Virginia, and me included in that. We all remember that. It was painful. Everybody agrees with that. And if I thought for 1 second that this bill was going to take an unnecessary risk to make that happen again, I'd stand right here and fight it, and I'd vote against it. I'd make every speech to try to kill the bill and take every parliamentary action that I could think of to do it. But I don't. And the professionals on the ground and in the offices and in the inspection offices across this state, they agree.
The bill was approved by a vote of 26-8, with only Democrats voting against it. It now goes to the House of Delegates for its consideration. Coal mine safety was also on the minds of Democrats in the House today. At issue was House Bill 2011, dealing with deliberate intent. The measure doesn't directly address mine safety issues, but those opposed to the bill said it will hurt miners. Liz McCormick explains.
Emotions were high on the floor today as House Bills 2005 and 2011 were discussed for passage. House Bill 2005 relates to alternative programs for the education of teachers. Delegate Amanda Pasden, the House Education Chair, stood to explain the bill.
We know that there's many counties around the state that do not have a qualified pool of applicants. There are teachers, or there are classrooms without teachers. There are about 300 classrooms that do not have a highly qualified educator in them right now, which means they have someone filling a role, but they are not highly qualified. What this bill does is try to expand that pool of options for our counties. This is not a mandate from Charleston. This is a tool in the toolbox for our counties to give them the opportunity to look outside of our normal traditional methods and hire in instances where they could find someone in their community that would fit their need.
Many Democrats stood to oppose the bill, saying it was cheapening the process many teachers have to go through to acquire their degrees. Delegate Nancy Guthrie stood to oppose the bill, saying the focus should be raising the wage for teachers.
I was hoping that we would be able to count on all of us rallying together to fight against cuts for children and families, as we did last year, to fight against cuts for higher education, as we all believe we should do. And yet, what we're doing in a tight budget year is something that every teacher that I've received letters from has said, please don't do. I think it undermines the credibility when what we really ought to be doing is knuckling down and trying to prioritize our budget so that we give teachers the pay raise that they need so that we can reduce the shortages that we've got.
Delegate Pasden stood again to support the bill in her closing remarks.
We have over 700 teaching vacancies, as you've heard many times through many references and speeches on this floor today. That number is from the Department of Education's 2014 report. We have over 300 teachers teaching outside of their field of study. This isn't anything against teachers. For those teachers that have stood with us and worked hard to get their certification and their education, thank you. because we don't pay you enough and we don't appreciate you enough. This isn't against teachers. This is, as the gentleman from the 7th put it, about 280,000 little lives that are depending on us to do the right thing for them. It is our responsibility to make sure that we put the most effective educator in front of them to give them the best foundation that they could possibly have to take on the role of their dreams of the 21st century.
House Bill 2005 passed 60-35. The next bill that caused a lot of debate on the floor was House Bill 2011, another priority tort reform bill. It's called the Deliberate Intent Bill, meaning an injured employee must provide proof that an employer deliberately intended to do something to cause the injury. Delegate Sean Fluharty opposed the bill.
This is a public relations ploy. That's what this is. And you want to call it tort reform, but I think that's a wrong assertion to make. It's really safety reform. Because what it's doing is creating an environment that has created the likes of Sago, creating the environment of protectionism, making it impossible to bring a claim. Protectionism of the likes of Dawn Blankenship, who currently is facing criminal indictment. We should just call this thing the Dawn Blankenship Protection Act, if you really want to get down to it.
Numerous Democrats stood to oppose the bill, calling the bill grotesque and impossible for employees to be protected. Delegate Barbara Fleshauer stood and said she had 29 reasons to oppose the bill and read the names of the 29 miners who died in the Upper Big Branch mine disaster in 2010. By the end of the debate, Delegate John Schott, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, described the accusations from Democrats that passing it would bring blood on the hands of the legislature. Schott went on to point out that the disasters at Sago in 2006 and the Upper Big Branch disaster, had they happened today, those miners would be protected because of the immense amount of evidence of violations. Schott then held up an advertisement to further his point.
This is an advertisement online from a local lawyer. And here's what he says. If you are injured on the job under certain circumstances, you may be eligible for a deliberate intent and workplace injury case, which is unique to the state of West Virginia. Which is unique to the state of West Virginia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we can remain unique and continue to say goodbye, kiss our kids goodbye, our grandkids goodbye, or we can get in line with the rest of the country, compete with our neighbors, and have a reasonable deliberate intent statute. We are not abandoning the idea that there are situations in which employers do extreme things that will injure our employees. That is preserved in here, but we do need predictability, we need certainty, and we need to be in the mainstream of this country.
House Bill 2011 passed 59-38. It now heads to the Senate for consideration. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Liz McCormick in the House.
Coming up, we'll talk with the state's Commissioner of Agriculture about his plans for mountaintop removal mining sites. First, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the Senate today.
Among the bills introduced in the Senate today, Senate Bill 444. Among its provisions, the bill removes the requirement that the person who provides the homeschooling instruction have a high school diploma. Senate Bill 447, to authorize a person who homeschools to issue a diploma to a student who has completed the program of secondary education. Senate Bill 448, to make homeschooled students eligible for a Promise Scholarship without taking the GED test. And Senate Bill 453, to update and clarify the article of the code relating to motor vehicle dealers, distributors, wholesalers, and manufacturers. Among the bills up for passage tomorrow, Senate Bill 19, to allow early childhood education programs to operate 4 days per week instead of 5. Senate Bill 60, to require food handlers to receive training from the Bureau of Public Health and carry a card to indicate their training. Senate Bill 242, the governor's bill to provide misdemeanor criminal penalties for using automated telephone calls to disseminate false, misleading, or deceptive information to individuals during a declared state of emergency. House Bill 2138, allowing non-commercial aircraft to land for recreational purposes and limiting the liability of the landowner. On second reading, Senate Bill 243 at the request of the governor to provide that nutritional standards for food served in public schools may be waived during a state of emergency. and Senate Bill 361, eliminating the prevailing hourly wage requirement for construction of public improvements.
State Agriculture Commissioner Walt Helmick is famous in some respects for calling West Virginia's agriculture industry a $6 billion opportunity. Of the more than $7 billion West Virginians spend on food each year, only about $1 billion of that is produced in the state, leaving plenty of room for growth. Here this evening to discuss the legislative changes he'd like to see in order to grow that industry is Commissioner Helmick from Pocahontas County. He was elected to his first term in 2012 after serving more than 20 years in the state's Senate. Commissioner, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Let's start with the program that you spoke with the members of the House about earlier this year that created some buzz, and that's hog farming on mountaintop removal mine sites. Is that a program that you need legislation to put in place, or is that something you all are working on?
No, we don't need legislation. That issue is out there. We've discussed it. We've looked at the possibility of having to have some legislation to do what we're doing, but we're working with the West Virginia Coal Association and the owners of mountaintop removal sites. And there's many of them around West Virginia. Indeed, there's over 105,000 acres of mountaintop removal sites. So we're showing those sites to potential developers, people from other states who are in this business, who want to look at West Virginia because of the remoteness of those sites, as well as having rail access, having water, and three-phase power, and the things that you have to have in that industry. So we think it's ideal for what they're looking for and what we want to do in West Virginia. So, we're excited about the program and what we might be able to do in the future.
There are always concerns with any program, and with this program, it's the waste and the smell from those farms. How do you deal with those?
Well, the remoteness, modern technology helps some with the smell of it, but obviously, there could be a problem there. But the remoteness, we believe, in looking at other states and the distance we will be from any populated area, helps take care of that particular issue. So far as the waste is concerned, it's a product that we think that will help enhance the future of that land as we try to convert it from what it is now to a usable property. And so we think we're all right with both of those issues.
Members of the House of Delegates later this week will be voting on a bill that changes the deer farming program from the Division of Natural Resources to the Department of Agriculture, excuse me. Does that make that industry grow? Does your oversight in the department help that industry grow in West Virginia?
Well, we now have about 26 sites that are identified as deer farms. We'd like to see that number grow. We know that we won't be as big as some, even the surrounding states where they have 800 to 1,000 deer farms, because we're going to walk very slowly with it. Assuming that it passes, we'll go very slowly with the process, and we'll work with the Department of Natural Resources in the transfer from the department to us. In fact, we started that process today with the assumption that it would pass. We've looked at it and we think that the time has come for it to be transferred to the Department of Agriculture. We're going to go very slow with it. We're going to make sure that it works. We feel that we can grow the industry in West Virginia like some other states have done.
There's another program you all are looking to begin in the next year, aggregation centers. Can you explain what that is?
Well, an aggregation center, in this case in West Virginia, we're modeling those after some other states. And in West Virginia, we're going to take 5 counties to begin with in the western part of our state where we have significant land. In Mason County, we have it in Cabell County, and we also have an opportunity in Putnam County as well as Lincoln and Wayne counties for an aggregation center. We'll put the center in Huntington, and we've done a significant amount of work to this point locating a site for this to happen. The growers will be then working with West Virginia University's Extension Service, with our Department of the conservation districts. They'll also be involved. And so we have a number of people that are involved that will help the growers. We'll have a horticulturist on site, and we'll be able to do the things that's necessary to grow the product in those different counties and then bring them to the center where we'll have a co-op involved in purchasing from the farmer and then utilizing that product in our system in West Virginia.
So kind of a food hub of sorts.
It is a food hub, and we'll have 6 or 7 of them in the state eventually. That's what we're after.
And you're working with other agencies like the Division of Corrections to make these things work?
Yeah, well, we're looking at the Division of Corrections because they buy a significant amount of product in West Virginia. And we, this past year, sold a lot of product to them. They helped grow it, though. They're in the process, both the men and the women at Lakin at the correctional facility there, and the men at Huttonsville. And so we grow a significant amount of product. They'll also be involved in the aggregation points because we'll be growing product on our farms, on our land, with correctional people that will be taken to those centers and then dispersed about the state. In addition to corrections, we'll also be looking at the school system, Department of Health and Human Services as well.
Well, that's a program that we'll certainly be keeping our eye on. Commissioner Helmick, thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Coming up, the Commissioner of Corrections talks about the challenges facing the state's prison system. But first, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today.
Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 2677 to create a legislative commission to study the feasibility of the state entering into sponsorship agreements for naming rights of bridges, overpasses, rest areas, roads, and exits. House Bill 2679 requires the reporting of job creation and retention data and tax credit data to the Department of Revenue and to report the data to the legislature and publish the reports on the Internet. And House Bill 2685 to ensure that students with alternative diplomas or alternative graduation requirements may receive the benefits of a 529 plan for prepaid college tuition. Up for passage in the House tomorrow, Senate Bill 7 requiring CPR instruction in public schools. Senate Bill 335 to allow initial responders to possess and administer opioid antagonists in suspected overdoses, and to ensure these antagonists are made available to individuals at risk of overdose, as well as to relatives, friends, and caregivers. House Bill 2444 to provide assistance to small businesses by the West Virginia Development Office. And House Bill 2568, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. On second reading, Senate Bill 237, creating the Captive Cervid Farming Act, requiring the Department of Agriculture to regulate the farms.
It was West Virginia Corrections Day at the state capitol. As Suzanne Higgins reports, the Commissioner of the Division of Corrections understands that this is an extremely lean budget year, but he's reminding lawmakers that the prison system has serious staffing issues.
Employees of the West Virginia Division of Corrections, the Regional Jail Authority, and Juvenile Services gathered today at the Capitol to showcase their respective facilities and responsibilities. Commissioner of the West Virginia Division of Corrections, Jim Rubenstein, says his people deserve the highest respect.
It is a dangerous environment. It's the nature of our business. Our folks provide a great service to provide for the safety and security of the state. And, we're dealing with some of the most dangerous folks in West Virginia who have committed some of the most horrendous crimes and still remain a danger while incarcerated.
A few years ago, the legislature passed Senate Bill 371 to address critical issues within the state's correction system, including inmate overpopulation. While not all the components of Senate Bill 371 have been implemented or yet funded, Rubenstein says progress has been made. At the time, there were 7,100 inmates housed by the DOC.
We saw an immediate decline in the population, and today we've been hovering in the 6,800 to 6,900 mark.
But the system only has room for 5,800 inmates, so the Division of Corrections houses about 1,000 of its inmates within the state's regional jails. Overcrowding contributes to another ongoing problem, position vacancies.
At our Mount Olive Correctional Center, which is the state's maximum security male facility, and our Huttonsville facility in Randolph County, which is the state's largest male facility, at over 1,130 inmates. Each one of those facilities has over 70-some uniformed correctional officer vacancies. It creates a tremendous amount of strain on the system. strain on the other employees, covering overtime, being froze over, working, 12, 16-hour shifts, driving home, some people over an hour each way, coming back. It's not a good situation, and hopefully we'll figure out a way to correct that where we can. It's very critical to the mission of all three agencies to be able to recruit, train, and retain good staff and keep tenured staff who know what they're doing, because we've got folks in environments that if you don't know what you're doing, we have zero margin for error in our job.
Rubenstein says the Division of Corrections spends $5 to $6 million a year of its operating budget on overtime costs. For the Legislature Today, I'm Suzanne Higgins at the Capitol.
This has been the Legislature Today. Tomorrow, with a bill to create charter schools moving through the legislature, we'll visit with the new Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Michael Martirano. We'll discuss that bill and other education issues. I'm Ashton Mara. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following:
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.